So when I was 13, my parents sent me to an all-girls fitness camp to work on becoming the best version of me. Well, let's be honest here, it was a fat camp. And it was as horrible as you can imagine. Bad food, all-day exercise, and god-awful counselors. The camp took place on a college campus, where they had us sleeping in dorms of 2 girls per room. But I had high hopes that it wouldn't be a complete waste of a summer, as my roommate seemed like a great girl. Let's call her Mary. We had similar interests and the same style. It seemed like a perfect match. We would chat late into the night, planning our escape from the camp, bemoaning having to give up our cell phones, though secretly I had managed to sneak mine in, and talking about our families and how much they sucked for sending us here. To be honest, I was surprised that she was even at this camp. She was actually pretty fit, and her parents had signed her up for the whole summer versus mine only sending me for 2 weeks. Only 2 days into being at this place, I was pulled aside by another girl who I had become close friends with. She warned me that Mary had a lot of issues, and the reason why she had been sleeping in a single for X amount of time was because no one else wanted to room with her. Well, I brushed it off, thinking it was just rumors and other girls being mean. That day at lunch, Mary seemed rather mad at me, and for the life of me I couldn't figure out why. So when I got a chance, I asked her what was up. She ranted at me about how everyone was so mean, and was I going to leave too. She went on to explain how this one girl she was rooming with switched rooms because she made friends with this popular girl, and that she made up lies to be popular. And, silly me, I believed her. We continued hanging out, and only now do I realize how she was keeping me from hanging out with anyone else. Near the end of my first week, the camp took us on a long walk over to the local pool. It was a big deal as it was super hot and only a once-a-week activity. Mary and I were super excited to go. When we got there, we quickly claimed some chairs and left our stuff there. As Mary had been at the camp for several months, she didn't have to pass some stupid "can you swim" test that I assume is mandatory in most camp settings, so we were separated for about 20 minutes. After I passed with flying colors, "Thank you, swim team," I jumped into the pool and just started floating around. I heard her calling my name and saw her waving me over to the deep end of the pool. I swam over and asked her what was up, and she said she wanted to show me something. Next thing I know, her hands are around my neck and she is shoving me underwater. Now I am a good swimmer, and I am very capable of holding my breath for quite a long time. But never in my life had anything like this happened to me, and I panicked and opened my mouth to scream. Luckily, before my mind had even processed what was happening, I had kicked up my legs and shoved her back and made a desperate escape. Somehow I managed to swim away and pull myself out of the pool. As I caught my breath and began to process what had just happened, I looked back at her. She was just staring at me, not having moved. I quickly grabbed my stuff and ran into the bathroom and called my mom. I was in tears as I explained what happened, and it was very obvious she didn't believe me. I stayed in that bathroom until we left to go back to the camp. I didn't leave the counselor's sides the entire walk back. When we arrived back at the camp, I was pulled aside by one of the women in charge. She very rudely demanded I give her my cell phone. I of course denied having one, and asked why she thought I did. She told me that my parents had called about some assault that had happened to me, and they told them I had called. Quickly I excused it, saying I borrowed a phone from a lady at the pool. Thankfully they bought that. They told me that I would be moved to a new room the next day, and that I had to spend the night with Mary one last time. Furiously I begged them to please let me sleep on the floor of another girl's room, but they insisted I was being melodramatic. As soon as I was left alone, again I raced to the closest bathroom and called my mom. That's when I learned the truth about Mary. I wasn't her second roommate, nor her third, fourth or fifth. I was the sixth girl to stay in a room with her. 3 of her roommates had left camp early, and the other 2 had switched rooms at the first opportunity. All 5 other girls had made allegations of violence from Mary against them, but the camp refused to do anything, and insisted she was just a troubled girl who wanted to make friends. Or as they told my parents, well, she has had some issues in the past. That night I didn't sleep at all, and neither did Mary. She sat up in bed staring at me all damn night. I could feel her watching me, and I was terrified. I had my phone clutched in my hand with 911 dialed and ready to call at any moment. I practically cried when the sun came up. That day I was moved to a new room, in a different building, and somehow managed to break my foot in the process, so my parents drove up and took me home with a cast on my foot to commemorate my time there. To this day I have had issues from what this girl did to me, and I have never been able to live with roommates or make friends as easily. So Mary, wherever you are out there, let's never meet again. Next story. What would have happened had I stopped my car? To preface this, I love to drive. Like hours-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities, and I'd usually take these drives at night since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license 4/5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism, though now that I've moved out and am in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a clusterfuck of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else, and decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too terribly long, since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere, the few houses miles back from the road lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in the snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest was jutted out onto the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside, with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey! Anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything I would leave, and the moment there was reception I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again I shout, "Hey! What happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah." I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rear-view mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car fast. The person did not have any blood on them or appeared injured in any way, wearing a mask not like a face mask for COVID or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was, I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rear-view mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened and what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of city limits he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police/sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic I managed to tell him what happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked for my safety, and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement so I couldn't leave, and that I was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them the sedan had been to take a look, and that they would try to catch the guys who did it, though with no cameras, and no description of the men I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic the thought never came to mind until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here, and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives to anywhere, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. Next story. Coworker turns stalker. I have several let's not meet stories rolling around in my head. I think today I'm ready to tell the story of my stalker. To preface this, I know there are a lot worse stalker stories out there, and mine might be pretty mild, but it still terrified me and haunts me today, nearly 10 years later. It was my first real full-time job after college. I went to school for art, but the job was basically an admin, along with a bunch of random responsibilities. At least once a week, I worked in the warehouse, counting and organizing inventory. A co-worker of mine started hanging around and seemed like he wanted to be friends. He was very helpful with the job, having been there for a while and knowing the ins and outs of the company. His name was Tim. He was 46, lived in his mom's basement, had never been married. He had a cat he talked about often, and claimed he used to be a Hell's Angel. He drove 18-wheelers and thought they were super cool. He started offering to smoke me out on lunch breaks, which I would accept, because duh. Then he started buying me lunch, stating my friend did this for me when I was your age, I'm just paying it forward. One day you can help someone else when you have the money to spend on them. He knew all the local places to eat and would choose a place, suggesting what I should try. It was a mistake to ever accept anything from him. But I'm a foodie, and he introduced me to things like Cuban espresso and burger buffets, adding excitement to my otherwise monotonous workday. Around that time, our friend's cat had several kittens. One of them was a beautiful tortoise, Penny, that I knew Tim would love, so I fostered her for a bit until he decided he wanted her and he came over to pick her up. She got along with his other cat and was super sweet. He loved her and would send me pictures of her and them together all the time. We had him over, my boyfriend and I, a few times over a period of about a year. He told the same stories over and over again, but we tolerated him because we thought he was lonely. I made him a dating profile because he often spoke about how he wants to meet the one, etc., but he rejected every single woman he matched with. He would pick their appearance apart on beautiful women who were in his age group, even some much younger. Now when I say Tim is an unattractive man, please trust. He was gross, overweight, sweaty. Had thick, coarse black hair and a huge gap in his incisors that he would suck spit through after he laughed, licking his teeth. He had giant pores and moles, and he was just old. We did have many enjoyable conversations, but I started to get the creepy vibes. For my birthday that year, he bought me a first edition of my favorite book, after I had told them this story about how I lost my mass-produced copy. I had exchanged favorite books with a friend, who ended up losing my favorite book. Her book was Twilight, which I hated. He also bought me a necklace that was for cancer survivors, which was very sweet, but also, kinda really personal and awkward. but still seemed innocent enough. He would show up with a case of beer, knocking on the door unexpectedly. We tried to be hospitable, but it started getting annoying. However, I felt bad for him, and he was always so overly nice and helpful at work. I felt bad turning him away. One day, after we had lunch, while sitting in his truck in our work parking lot, he told me he thought I was the one. I reminded him about my boyfriend, and he said no, he's not right for you. You are supposed to be with me. No, Tim. You know I care about you as a friend, but I am not interested in anything with you like that. You are making me very uncomfortable. I love you. I can take care of you. Think of all I can do for you. I have $XXXXXX in savings. Please stop. This is getting weird. I don't like you like that at all. Please drop it. I got out of the truck and shut the door. The storm was brewing. After he confessed his love for me, I told my husband, then boyfriend, everything. He had warned me, and he reminded me how he called it. How he always knew this would happen, that Tim's creepy. That I shouldn't have accepted all the food and gifts, etc. He was totally right, and I felt sick. I started putting distance between Tim and I, while still being kind and sociable at work. I told my husband everything. Tim would call me over and over again, even though I always ignored his call. Until one night, we got sick of it, and I answered the phone and told him to stop calling me. He was crying and begging me to talk to him. My boyfriend took the phone and told him to fuck off and hung up. That's when the threat started. He would leave voicemails about how he couldn't stand to look at Penny, and how he was going to take her in the woods and kill her. Or he could just let her free, she would be eaten by wild animals since she was still so small. He said she reminded him of me, and that he hated her as much as he hated me, that he wanted to bash her brains in. I started to call into work sick. I didn't want to see him. He ignored me deliberately, which I appreciated. He wouldn't look at me but acted normal besides his sudden coldness towards me. Seeing him was awful. I ended up getting laid off. Tim had other co-workers try to contact me on his behalf, people reaching out telling me I need to call him, that he's hurt by my sudden leaving. I would get calls from random phone numbers in my area, and it would be Tim. I would hang up as soon as I heard him say hello. I changed my phone number. We moved across the country. It was maybe a year later, he somehow found my new number and called again, leaving this huge voicemail. He said he had found the one. But also, he was dying. I can't remember how or why he was dying. It's all hazy now. But he needed this innovative technology or surgery that happened to be only available in my town, in my state 1,000 miles away from where he lived, and we worked together a year before. And he wanted to meet up. It was all such a coincidence, and he was so excited to catch up and introduce me to his pregnant fiancée. He also needed my address. At this time, I was pregnant with my first and only child. Tim said his fiancée was pregnant too. That we would be parents at the same time. At that moment, I blocked every single person I had ever known from that town on Facebook. Every single person that knew Tim that he could have gotten information from. I changed my phone number again. The nightmares started of him showing up in the middle of the night, having somehow found us. Of him carrying a case of beer, banging on the door, sucking spit through his teeth. I felt like he wanted to find me so he could get back at me somehow. Looking back, he was a total incel. I don't know if any of his story was true or what his plans were.